Hello, good night. Welcome to Conversation with Rickford Burke. Of course, this is Rickford here in New York. Welcome to another edition of Conversation with Rickford Burke. Share the link. Those of you watching me on YouTube, ensure that you subscribe. Just click the subscribe button. If you're watching me on Facebook or on Twitter or on IG, follow me. If you're watching particularly on Facebook, follow and like the pages that you're watching on right now, or whatever page you're watching on right now. Keep sharing the link, everybody. Keep sharing the link. This is going to be a very important program. Good night to you here if you're watching me from New York and the West Coast, East Coast of the United States. If you're watching me from the East Coast, West Coast, sorry, I'm getting my sides of the country mixed up. You're watching from the West Coast, it's now what? 7:33 p.m. here on the West Coast. East Coast, it's 9:33 p.m. If you're watching me from Guyana, and like most of you probably would be, um, or the Caribbean, good night to you. It's just about 9:34 in Guyana. I think it's 10:34 in Jamaica. If you're watching me from Europe and Africa and Asia, good morning to you. Particularly good morning to my friends in the US military, watching from Japan and Germany. Hello, Bartica, Esiquibo. I see my friend from Bartica tuning in. Spread the word. Let everybody in Bartica know that Conversation with Rickford Burke is on. Keep sharing the link, everybody. Tonight we will have Nigel Hughes, candidate for leader of the AFC. Keep sharing the link, everybody. I'll be back in 30 seconds and we will start the program. Share the link far and wide. Call up everybody. Share the link on WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Facebook, email, wherever, MSN message, wherever you can. Spread the word. Conversation Bigfoot Burke is on. See you in 60 seconds. All right, keep sharing the link. We'll be back in just a few more seconds. We'll correct the technical issue and we'll be back. Share the link. Are we ready? All right, be back in a couple of seconds. All right, let's go. Again, good night, everybody. Welcome to Conversation with Rickford Burke. Let me welcome a few of you. Let me see who I can. Joseph George, good night. Where you watching from? Tell me, let me know where you're watching from. Camille Cox, good night. Natasha Murphy, watching from Guyana. Brenda Braffett, thank you very much. Joan Robertson, thank you. Hello, Donna Holder, good night. Um, Aziz, Jamal Aziz, good night. Watching from West Coast Beast. Auntie Brenda Casey, watching from Brooklyn. Lloyd Primo, good night. Kenneth D. Floremonth, good night. Watching from Maryland. Big up Maryland. What town in Maryland you are, Kenneth? Peggy Elias? Good night to you. Keith Beresford, New Jersey in the house. Mary O'Brien, Lynette Cox, good night. Watching from Florida. Good night, my brother in Germany. Jermaine Griffith, watching from Guyana. Come on, share the link, everybody. Keep sharing the link. I can't keep up with these comments. By the time I see a name, it's gone. Fort Washington. Did I see that? Siselski. Good night to you, Mohan Prasad. Good night to you. Sorry, but I couldn't see where you're watching from. Keep sharing the link, everybody. Shalom Griffith, good night. West Coast Demerara. Vanessa Abrams, good night. Watching from Region 1. Wow. Share the link to everybody in Region 1, Shalom. Good night. Lynette Baggett, watching from Brooklyn. Brooklyn in the house. Valerie Noel. Myrna Stobie, good night. Dennis Haley, good night. Come on. Hail me up. Let me see where you're watching from. I gotta do like Sherrod. Smash that emoji. If you like the vibes tonight, just send up some thumbs up, send up some love, send up some hearts. If you're repping Guyana tonight, let's see some Guyana flags in the comment. Massive amounts of Guyana flag. And by the way, the Guyana Independence celebration in Brooklyn was because of scheduling. We had to schedule it for August 18th. So spread the word. August 18th, we'll be having the parade. This year is going to be massive. August 18th, Sunday, August 18th, the Guyana Independence Parade. And then we'll have the concert right in Brooklyn, Church Avenue, Brooklyn. Spread the word. Guyana Independence Committee on Sunday, July 18th. Spread the word. All right. Keep sharing the link, everybody. Again, I'm responding to some comments. Again, if you're watching from Facebook, like and follow the page you're watching on. If you're watching from YouTube, I know we have a bigger audience on YouTube. I'm going to check over there just now, but right now we have, 7,000 people watching. Let's get it up to 27,000, everybody. Keep sharing the link. Let everybody know that Rickford Burke, Conversation with Burke is on. And I'm talking to attorney at law Nigel Hughes tonight, who is the chairman of the ASC, FC. And without further ado, let me introduce attorney at law, Nigel Hughes. Nigel, some people say you're the top lawyer in Guyana. I know you're more modest than that, but welcome to the Conversation with Rickford Burke tonight.
Hi, Rickford. Thank you very much. Can I please apologize for the delayed start? There was a massive traffic jam on the Linden Highway, Linden-Sioux-Lake Highway. We were up in Linden today, and it took us about 3.5 hours to get down. So I'm really sorry about this. But let me just correct you. I'm not the chairman of the Alliance for Change.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Candidate for leader of the Alliance for Change.
Yeah, Mr. Duncan is the chair. No, he's the secretary.
And I'll be talking to him on Tuesday.
Good.
I thought your wife is the chair.
My wife is the chair. Sorry, yeah, he is the general secretary.
I hope she did not hear you.
I hope she'll forgive me.
Kathy, forgive him. So, welcome. Before we start, I found an interesting clip with Forbes Burnham, the founder leader of Guyana, talking about development. And it seems to me, even though that was what, almost 59 years ago, sorry, it was the ninth, about 50 years ago, um, or 49 years ago, it seems as though his speech is very relevant today. And uh, he was, I'm not sure what is right, but he was actually talking about development and some of the social development that we need to experience in Guyana as of relevant right now. So let's listen to Forbes Burnham.
But, as I have always emphasized, political independence is not an end in itself. Rather, it represents an opportunity to create a society in which all citizens are assured of social and economic justice. The People's National Congress at all times recognized that the process of transforming the society, which process will be given new impetus and momentum with the promulgation later this year of the new Constitution, was not going to be an easy task, and that the path ahead would be strewn with many obstacles. The PNC, as the party in government, never attempted to delude the Guyanese people about the sacrifices which would be demanded of all of us as we moved in unison to free our country from poverty, want, hate, fear, and foreign domination. The process of nation building and societal transformation is never easy. You, for instance, in North America, would do well to acquaint yourselves with the hardships and privations which went into making the United States the world's richest and most powerful country today. At the moment in Guyana, we are going through a period of difficulty. And this is not peculiar to us, but is the common, unfortunate lot of most, if not all, of the non-oil producing developing countries. Indeed, even the developed countries, and many of you can personally attest to this, have not escaped the effects of the worldwide crisis. But for all the problems being experienced at home, and which you have most certainly heard about, development has not stagnated. For example, last year witnessed the initiation of massive ventures like the Tapakuma scheme, $103 million, the Mahaika-Maikoni-Abari scheme, $200 million, the Upper Demerara River Forestry Project, $76 million, and the Blackbush Polar Extension, $115 million. It was the year also of the completion of the Kanji Bridge and that dream of the Demerara River Bridge, which many of us had despaired of seeing in our lifetime. During this year, it is expected, among other things, that work will commence on the erection of a solvent plant for extracting oil from rice bran, and also that there will be the manufacture on a large commercial scale of byproducts like vinegar and yeast from molasses. Just a few days ago, your government released the Guyana Investment Code, which, as its name implies, sets out the guidelines for investing in Guyana. It is a document which all of you should scrutinize and popularize, and one which, by setting out clearly and unequivocally the government's policy in this area, should hopefully answer many questions and set clear parameters. Sure, we have had and will continue to have difficulties. And of course there was Jonestown. But we are confronting these issues and problems with a grit, determination, and intensity, which daily suggests that we shall overcome. Finally, let me assure you that your government considers you to be very much part of Guyana and welcomes you home. Indeed, invites you to join in the exciting, though demanding task of development and nation building. As we celebrate the 9th anniversary of the Cooperative Republic, I feel confident.
Rickford, I don't know. It seems as if we've lost you. If we have, I'm assuming that you will come back to
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was my fault. That was my fault. I'm saying here we are from the leader of Guyana, and I'm sure it was refreshing for some people to actually hear his voice. Um, Talking about balanced development. If you notice, every development project that he outlined was in a different part of the country, Upper Takatu, Blackbush Polder, Region 3, etc. You also spoke about national unity and the need for going forward together. Most importantly, he spoke about social justice. Would you, how do you feel now in 2024 um, to be fighting the battles that feel like battles our ancestors fought against colonialists?
Rickford, I think you chose an excellent extract from Mr. Burnham's presentation. I have to say that because it does a couple of things. One of them is that it identified the blueprint, which is absolutely relevant today. And I just want to pick one of those projects. I'm gonna answer you, but I just wanted
Sure.
to touch on a couple of things that I'm not sure people know. The Upper Takakuma project, which was the hydropower project. If you were to conduct a study today about the cost of energy and compare the gas to shore to the Upper Tapakuma, subject to all the environmental concerns project, I rather suspect that the Upper Tapakuma project is going to come out as the preferred location for cheap energy for several reasons. One, it is scalable upwards. The gas to shore project that they were talking about here in Guyana, the model that did not have a feasibility study, was limited in scope and horrendously expensive to scale upwards. The Amelia Falls, that was not scalable upwards, that was fixed. So Mr. Burnham, since back in, I suppose that was the 9th year of our independence, around 1979, because he said Jonestown had occurred, had a blueprint which is still relevant today. I think that is a testament to the amount of work, research, and foresight that existed at that time in terms of planning national development. And I think we need to recognize that. The difficulty is that Mr. Burnham didn't have the money to carry out those projects. The country didn't have the money. But to come to your original question, it is evident that the plans of that era intended to develop several regions. You had the MMA scheme, unprecedented in Region 5. You had the Blackbush Polder scheme he spoke about, Region 6. You had the Upper Takakuma project. He spoke about converting molasses to extract oil. All of these were very, very creative and advanced projects, even by today's standards. I mean, the MMA project, it really should be expanded. But we find ourselves in this dilemma now where we're taking all the arable land on the coast and putting houses down rather than having a planning to develop housing on land that is less arable. and use our arable land. But those are some of the
For the
challenges.
benefit of our young people, could you say what the MMA project is about?
Okay, MMA stands for Mahika Maikoni Abari Project. And that was a huge project in which they were going to drain all those lands between the Mahika River and the Abari River, going all the way past the Crown Dam. They would drain them and make those lands available for agricultural development. Most of that is for rice planting and rice development. Huge, huge, unprecedented a project. Very successful, designed, of course, by the Dutch, and it drained all those areas and made all that land available for agricultural development, primarily rice.
So I guess they were swamplands.
Yeah, they were inundated. If you look at the history of Guyana, what happens is when the Europeans came here, the coast was swamp. That's how come the owners of these estates never lived here. It was hostile. You had malaria and all kinds of issues. And the Dutch had to build a seawall to stop the salt water from coming in. And then they had to empolder the entire coast. That's how come you have the not the drainage, sorry, the big catchment area for water. The words stopping me, escaping me at the moment. At the back of Mahika and Abari, that entire area where they keep that water, and then the dams keep that water out, and then they open it in a controlled manner so that it flows through the estates all the way out to the ocean. The Conservancy, sorry, the Conservancy.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
What lessons can we draw from the fact that even Burnham, even though he was so much vilified, had what actually appeared to be equitable development? Go ahead.
I think Burnham is vilified, I think, only in one area, and that is electoral issues.
Mhm.
I have not heard any serious person, let me just say,
Right.
give that qualification. I have not heard a single serious economist. I have not heard a single serious politician, developmental politician, criticize the developmental plans either at the point of concept. So we talk a lot today, for example, about food security. You may remember that there was the Feed, Clothe, and House the Nation by 1976. That was food security. He was
Right.
saying that Guyana had to be able to feed itself. And that's at a time when our import bill was huge for foreign goods. We used to bring in a lot of canned stuff, and that's how come we had the import replacement. So he was talking about Guyanese feeding themselves prior to 1976 and by 1976, long before it was fashionable to talk about food security. He was talking about housing. What's the craze today? Everybody, the competition between all political parties is to say, I gave out 10,000 house lots, I gave out 50,000 house lots. Mr. Burnham was actually talking not about distributing house lots, he was talking about distributing housing. You would remember that when Carrie Festa came in 1972, they built the whole of Festival City. That whole area of South Rumbelt got developed during his period. So he was saying we needed food security, we needed housing, and we needed to clothe ourselves. So there were projects that were there. And of course he was the person who headed the state, and these were his ideas. But he also had exceedingly talented and skilled people in several areas who assisted him in formulating that project. So I don't think the vilification, if we're going to have a serious discussion rather than just some sort of rhetorical political discussion, the vilification for Mr. Burnham really came in relation to electoral politics. And that can be a discussion we can have on a separate day, on a
Right.
separate issue. But I certainly don't think in terms of his developmental projects. Now, one of the issues, and I believe this is something we can discuss, and history may not necessarily come out in his favor, is whether we ought to have nationalized as quickly as we nationalized. And a lot of that is probably due to the fact that we were newly independent and we really were unaware of what the developed world does when you take their assets. That's not something that you want to do, especially if you're a small nation, because you take these assets, and unless you have the clout globally, they're going to kill you. Look at Haiti. Haiti dared to stand up for its independence and paying the price today. So unless you are the size of an Iran and you have a revolution like they had in 1979 when the Ayatollah came into office, and you take control of all those private assets and nationalize them, Ghana was a little small and we were a little too dependent on people other than ourselves who control the marketplace. And I suspected we didn't quite do that. So we did sugar, bauxite first, we did Sprostons, and then we did sugar. And I think what happened in between that time is we had the shock from the oil prices, and we got ourselves into difficulties from which we never recovered. I personally don't or didn't support the socialist approach, which is that the state should control the commanding heights of the economy. But that was very fashionable at the time, and I think the economists at the time said so. And I would not use the benefit of 2020 hindsight to launch a serious criticism on it. But I think we've learned our lesson in that regard.
On that point, as a ideology, political ideology, socialism, isn't it a bit, in terms of equity, the promotion of equity and equality, can we actually have a real democracy without some element of socialism that promotes social justice, equality, equity, etc.? Because we see what socialism has done. If you look in the Western world, we see what has happened. We have very rich people and very poor people. And there is no, for the want of a better word, no, I would say, I want to choose my words very carefully before somebody challenges what I'm saying. But there's no, maybe in the United States and France, you have a little bit of redistribution of wealth in terms of social nets, social safety nets, healthcare, etc.
I don't think you have a lot of social safety nets in the United States. You have a lot of social safety nets in the Scandinavian
Europe, right?
countries, and in the Scandinavian, and even the United Kingdom. I mean, if you think of the United Kingdom,
well, we have Medicare, Medicaid, and so on.
Yeah,
but also welfare.
But Rickford, if you compare the national health system in the UK with what you have in the US, there's no comparison there. I mean,
but I don't want to use the US alone. I want to say, that's why I said the Western world. And
but there's no standard across the Western world, is there?
Right,
there's no common standard.
But you're making my point, because they promote themselves as this beacon of democracy to the world. But how can we have democracy when we have inequality? And so don't you think that in formulating our political philosophy to govern our countries, we should have some element of quote unquote socialism that allows for equity and equality in the society?
Okay, so I'm not quite. We first have to understand what you mean by socialism before I can respond to that. If you're saying that we should have social justice, if you're saying that we should have equality of opportunity, if you're saying that we should have social safety nets, if you're saying that we need to protect the vulnerable, if you're saying that the economy ought not to be managed in a way which allows those that are economically powerful to oppress those that don't have,
those elements of socialism, because socialism has other elements.
So that's why I don't want to say that we need socialism. I think we should.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Okay, let me really find what I'm saying. So socialism has various aspects, and apart from the central control of the commanding heights of the economy, you have provision for what you just described: vulnerable in society, ensure that the rich doesn't control everything in the society, and the promotion of equity, where the small man feels and actually participates in the economy and in the decision making of the country. Those aspects of it, some people might argue that's democracy, but
democracy is not a system of governance. It's not a political philosophy. It guarantees those that are citizens of the state the right to have their vote counted, which is a completely different thing, I suspect, from
right. Well, that's that's just one aspect of democracy. But let's focus on the point I'm trying to make is Forbes Burnham is criticized for what people say communism or socialism, but
Burnham wasn't a communist.
He was not a communist, right? But some people ascribe that to him. But I want to focus on the aspects of what the Western world might want to describe as socialism, which is the things that you just described. But I'm saying, can we, as an underdeveloped or developing country, get to development without some aspects of those things you just described, which provides a safety net for those who are less fortunate, ensure that there's human development, ensure that there's housing, the government provides for that, ensure that there's proper health care, ensure, rather than leave people to go and fight for themselves. So don't we need some aspect of that in our philosophy that powers the government?
Okay, so I want to start off by saying that you can, in a quote unquote capitalist society, have mechanisms that protect the vulnerable, guarantee human rights, and
Right.
provide medical services, etc., for those who are more vulnerable. So you can have that, like in Finland. Finland, or the Scandinavian countries, by no means are they socialist, but they have a lot of the state's resources dedicated to providing those services. And so my approach or response to you would be driven more by what we're trying to achieve. So we first have to identify the goal, and then how we identify the route to get there. So what is the principle and what are the policies? So in a case like Guyana, and I suspect that what drove the desire to quote unquote become socialist in the sense of controlling the commanding heights of the economy was the fact that when you looked at Guyana in the colonial era, all the economic benefits and goods went to a very narrow class of persons, and the class that it went to exported that capital. So you had bookers, for example. Bookers, we used to be called Booker Guyana. Bookers controlled, 80% of the economy, and Bookers was dedicated towards delivering dividends for its shareholders, all of whom were outside of the country. So if you were a developmental politician, you would look at that and say, this is unacceptable, because all the country was supposedly getting were taxes. Everything else left. And the entire economy was structured for bookers to increase their dividends to their shareholders without focusing on the development of Guyana. So any politician, Mr. Jagan, when they confronted with that model, they're going to say, this can't work. We have to change it. And I think Guyana had the very peculiar position of having two major parties that were both left of center. In the rest of the Caribbean, you had, for example, in Barbados, you had the Conservative Party that Prime Minister Motley now leads. It was Barbados, was it the Labour Party? Yeah. The
BLP.
Barbados Labour, yeah, BLP. And you had the DLP, which was a lot more driven by social equalities, equity,
Right.
etc. In Jamaica, similarly, you had the JLP, the right-wing party, and you had the PNP, left-wing party. So that the election cycle allowed
and the same in Trinidad.
Same in Trinidad. Good. Except that Trinidad, like Guyana, because of the ethnic issue, the division wasn't necessarily quite left and right. But in Guyana, irrespective of the race, both parties were left. In Trinidad, Dr. Williams' party, I don't think it was progressive, maybe soft left, pink perhaps, but it certainly wasn't far left. And then, of course, they found oil. So I think in Guyana's case, what we have to look at is we have to look at where's the wealth distributed in Guyana. Is that wealth getting there through a fair process?
Right.
And also, those that are most vulnerable. Here's the staggering statistic in Guyana. 39.9% of our people are living in serious poverty. We have 20% of our kids living in extreme food poverty. 40% of them living in moderate food poverty. That's a problem. So without deciding whether or not you are socialist, capitalist, or whatever you want to call you, clearly there is a need for us to devise programs and policies that will eliminate completely child food poverty. Because you can't have a society in which 20% of your children, which is 1 in 5, are living in extreme food poverty. And that's a World Health Organization figure, a UNICEF figure.
So before you go on there, let me come back to what you just said. So you've identified one of the major problems with Guyana, which to me resembles when we came out of independence, because you had a certain class of
we came to independence.
Came out of colonialism that controlled the majority of the economy. And when you have that, you'll have extreme poverty. And so right now we have extreme poverty again. And when you look, you have a certain class of people again controlling the economy. And so that's why it shows that that
Yeah,
speech there that excerpt from Burnham, because it speaks to how do we achieve social justice. It speaks to equitable development. The modern term for it now is inclusive growth. So how do we achieve, as a someone running to be a leader of a political party, what is your vision for how do we achieve inclusive growth, which will address the poverty issue? Because
sure.
inclusive growth means that everybody in the country must benefit from the economic progress of the country.
I'm happy you asked that, and I hope you allow me the time to answer it.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so we have to start off by looking at the data. We have to look at who's poor, where they're poor, who is underserved, who is poorly served, who is not served at all, and who is overserved. And so we have to clearly what is happening in Guyana. We have discovered oil and we have had 5 years of oil production. Let us look at where that money has gone. You can't, in a society like Guyana, especially which doesn't have a history of looking at numbers and crunching them and having a conversation with the nation, say, oh, I am going to build roads because I'm elected. I'm deciding that I will come down the road and give you $500,000, and you don't have an overarching development program. You have to have it. It's almost crazy. I think somebody said that I remember reading somewhere that the Minister of Finance says we're going to make this up as we go along. You cannot make up the developmental plans of your country. When we had no money, we had a department in government called the Department of State Planning. And that is for this. Let me just tell you what we're facing for the next 5 years. The offshore oil developments that are coming on stream, when we ramp up past 1 million barrels a day between 2025 and 2030, that cash flow that comes in, if we don't have the absorptive capacity, whether in investment or a combination of investment, structural development, educational development, protection of the investment, if we don't have that in place, that money will completely disappear. And at the end of 5 years, we don't know what's going on. So a politician wakes up and thinks that I can get votes because I can put down a football stadium in the middle of a place in which only 10 people play football. Or you end up, for example, with people deciding that they're going to put down a cricket stadium in Linden. Linden is notoriously successful at athletics. It's been that way since before I was a child. We got beat. I mean, our region 4 got beaten by Linden almost every year into school sports. That surely would be a reason why you would put a stadium, an athletic stadium with a full synthetic track in Linden. That's the sort of data-driven decision you want. And we are now about to embark upon the next 5 years of oil production. And to get to 1 million barrels a day, ask yourself, where are we going to get the labor of the correct technical capacity to be able to provide that service? So you're talking about local content. And I just want to juxtapose that against this statistic. The official figure from the Ministry of Education says that almost 50% of our students do not finish secondary school. So what does that mean? 1 in 2 students coming out of school will not have the ability to be employed in the #1 industry and the only industry we'll have at the rate we're going for the next 5 years. Because the oil industry doesn't hire you unless you're qualified, you're certified, the qualifications you have are acceptable. So 1 in 2 students in Guyana who are Guyanese will not get employed and they will not be employable. So then what happens? They have the same desires, they see the same development, they have the same smartphones, and they will not be able to develop legally or earn legally the money that will allow them to enjoy the basic minimum standard of living. So what are they going to do? Get involved in illegal activity. because the official system says you're not employable. And you can't expect young people to just sit down and say, well, I can't get a job. They're going to get creative. And then you create a whole set of other societal problems. So one of the things that we have to do to develop this equitable society that all of us want to have, or say we want to have, is we have to pour horrendous resources into education to make sure that the quality of the student from the time they get into the kindergarten, that critical stage between 3 and 10, that they have the best educational system, and that we end up with, at the end of common entrance, at the end of primary school, with 90% of our people being at the highest possible level. Then they have to go into secondary school. We have to make sure not all of them going to be academic. They're going to be vocational. The technical, we have to make sure that those people who are better skilled at vocational crafts are going to be able to go start their own business. So I go to school and I'm not academically inclined. I decide I'm going to become a high-class welder. I get the certification. I can get a job or open my own business in a modern Guyana. That's not happening now for 50% of the students. And the social consequences of that are a problem. But the real solution to this is that all the political parties, certainly this is what I advance, and if I am elected as leader of the Alliance for Change, I would seek to persuade my party to say, look, we need to have every single party sit down and decide there are 3 or 4 areas that we will determine a 10 to 15-year plan, and we will all commit to sticking with it. Education, number 1. Health, number 2. Foreign affairs, because of the threats to our borders, number 3. And fourthly, an economic development plan that is 10 to 15 years. We can all agree the fundamentals of that, and we can argue and have election discussions about how we can tweak it. But at least that will signal not only to our population, but to international investors a level of stability for economic growth. One of the other things that just one more minute, that we definitely need is that to manage the system, we need institutions. We need a petroleum commission like yesterday. We need institutions, not an individual waking up tomorrow and saying, oh, we're going to have a gas to shore, or we're going to have a Skeldon project, or we're going to do this, without any obligation on their part or through our laws to go through feasibility studies to justify this and to engage the population through its means in having real discussions about that project.
That development plan that you're talking about, we can develop all the plans we want. Under our system of government, a government changes every 5 years, and the government will not be obligated to do it unless that plan, to me, is enshrined in law and probably passed with an overwhelming majority. I'm not saying 2/3, but passed with a voting threshold that does not allow another government to change it. Because, for instance, look, we had very stringent restrictions with regard to how, or regulations with regard to how the Natural Resource Fund would be managed and how money would be withdrawn. And the PP came to power, use their 1-seat majority and change it up so that they could just raid the fund. So I'm thinking that in order for us to indeed develop, and maybe that plan can be included in a national budget, where if it's passed, or maybe separate from the national budget because that requires just a majority, we have either a constitutional amendment or an increased threshold from just a majority to make sure that a future government doesn't change that development plan and the monies budgeted for the projects that constitute the plan. Do you agree that we need legislation?
Yeah, you're drifting into my area that I've been advocating for a long time. We need serious constitutional change. We cannot have a system like the system we have, in which the fact that you have 1 seat more allows you to do what you want. And I agree with you. This 10 to 15-year plan, and I'm saying that's a minimum. It should be longer. Ought to be protected by legislative procedures. Absolutely. And if you want to tinker or tamper with the fundamental elements, because of course built into that system you have to deal with unexpected events and shocks to the system. I just and I only use this from the point of view, nothing to do with human rights. The Chinese plan their developmental cycles in 25-year cycles. They don't, and this is a separate human rights issue, and we can park that for a moment. That allows the sort of rapid development that you saw in China. Compare that to your system in America. And again, I'm not dealing with democracy and all the consequences of it. If you continue to have these significant swings and you have economic policy being bogged down by political arguments, you sometimes end up in a difficult position that occurs occasionally in the United States, where you have the country goes into what's it when they're going to default, and neither side is passing the bill, and the entire service starts to shut down because there's a political dispute. That affects your system. And in a society that is as complicated as America, with as complicated a financial system as America, when you have that sort of shutdown, the damage it does, not only to confidence, but the damage it does to the entire system is significant. So I am saying, just let us look at what can work. We are a small country. We don't have ideological differences anymore. Since 1992, there are no ideological differences. The PPP just took communism out of their I didn't say not manifesto, took it out of their constituent documents. So all of us now are committed per force to the market economy. So the only difference between the parties is ethnics. They don't
Well,
even argue.
the PPP is said it now dedicated to democratic centralism, which in itself requires one small group of people controlling, making all the decisions, which is a dictatorship. So I think that's just semantics.
Yeah, their methodology is, like you said, centrally driven, and the
Right,
people at the top make the decisions for the bottom. But
right,
that doesn't work, as we all know, particularly in a multi-ethnic society. It can't
right.
work. You can't have a non-representative set of decision makers, shut out those that are legitimately elected by half your population who don't participate in that decision making process. The National Assembly doesn't serve its function as a place for real debate. So you're saying to half of the population, you are not worthy of participating in deciding how this economy is run. And it won't work. It will not work. The best in the world might have tried that, but it just can't work.
I deliberately started this discussion with the whole developmental question, and you've now established a platform for, if you're elected leader of the AFC, how you'll advise your party to proceed in terms of its development. It's just in summary. Um, but you're running now for AFC leader, and I just want to ask some rapid questions. First, um, we've had how many, seven or so presidents, executive presidents. If you were to be elected leader of the AFC and there was some sort of coalition, and that coalition government would be successful and you were to lead it, which one of these presidents that we've had before would you study to include that vision that president had in the way you govern the country?
Two things. One, I'd study all the presidents, because all the presidents had valid positions when they came to power. And two, my vision for the country wouldn't be constrained by any model any of them had. My vision for the country is constrained by, or determined by, what we face and what sort of Guyana we want to build. So I certainly wouldn't be saying I am going to implement Dr. Jagan's philosophy or Mr. Burnham's philosophy, because I don't live in their times. We are not
Right.
in their times. We have to find, and I have ideas on it, but my ideas are subject to discussion by everybody. We have to find ideas that will deliver a modern Guyana in which all of our people participate, have equal opportunity, and that we leave nobody vulnerable, and that we look at the data and reduce all of that. So I can't say Mr. Hoyt was caught in particular circumstances at a particular time. and therefore he was forced to privatize. I don't know if he would have done it without pressure from the multilateral financial institutions. But I don't think this is about repeating any model from anybody else. This is about how we are going to move Guyana forward. No, so I can't. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer.
No, that's fine. That's your answer. Next question. The Alliance for Change emerged out of the two parties, and
The alliance, the leaders of the alliance,
the leaders, right? The leaders for Alliance for Change. That's what I meant.
two of
Emerged
the
from
three leaders, two
huh?
of the three leaders,
Two of the three leaders, right?
yeah.
Right.
One was
Uh,
WPA.
one was WPA, but some. And I'm basing this question was sent to me by a few persons, so I just want to give the audience an opportunity for the question to be asked. I'm not going to ask it the way they ask it. I'm going to put it my
Feel
own way.
free to ask it anyhow. I mean, I have put myself in a position where I
Right.
have
So,
to deal with difficult questions. So
right.
please feel free.
No, I'm actually going to make the question more difficult.
Sure.
But the Alliance for Change has given people some anxiety. Some of its supporters and some of its coalition partners anxiety
You're being
because.
kind. You're being kind. I mean, I think we have to be bold when we're discussing what has happened. I mean, a significant number of people are disappointed or were disappointed with the Alliance for Change. Whether that disappointment is justified or not, I think we need to acknowledge that fact.
Right.
It has lost a certain level of popularity. It's lost a lot of its supporters, and that's a fact. So anxiety, perhaps you're being kind. We have challenges, but we also have.
What is your plan if you're elected leader to regain that support that you believe that the Alliance has lost?
Okay, the first thing we have to present to the people of Guyana our plan for the future. We have to say this is how we think the economy should go. This is how we think social development, education development. This is our plan. Easy to do that. You can put that in a manifesto. We also have to provide those people with how our commitment to them can be enforced. So in other words, what are the steps we are going to take to be able to manage the economy and manage the next 5 years of oil production as we ramp up to 1 million barrels, manage the 5 years after that, and what are the core principles? That we have to provide as at a minimum. Fundamental to that is, from my personal point of view, and I would have to get the party's endorsement on that, is that our current constitutional arrangements cannot work in the sort of society we have. You cannot say that you have to collate before an election. People should be free to collate after the election. 2, we have a multi-ethnic society. So we cannot have a president who enjoys just a one-seat majority. You need to have, similar to Suriname, you need to have a president that enjoys the majority of a much wider base of the electorate. 60% of the people must agree. Whether that means the members of the National Assembly, 60% of them have to identify who becomes the president. But this winner-take-all policy has to go as a matter immediately. People have to be able to get together, collate after an election, and those are the immediate things.
We're going to come back to that because I have a section on the constitution reform. The Alliance for Change was in a coalition with the APNU, and it decided to go to the local government elections alone, even though it was still in the
which election? Which local government?
I think on the President Granger.
Oh yeah, the first local government election.
Right.
After the coalition.
Not the last one, right? But some people saw that as a betrayal. So. I'm not sure, I mean, that's one of the questions I've asked you. Some people saw it as a betrayal and it damaged the AFC because it didn't perform well. Whereas if it had stayed in the coalition and competed the local government elections as a coalition, like it did, the general election was successful, they would have been successful together. So if you are elected leader of the
can I just
Alliance for Change, 1 second. If you're elected leader of the Alliance for Change, would you commit to always stay within the coalition when it comes to electoral politics?
Well, the first thing, there's no coalition at the moment.
Right, if there's one.
Okay, so No, but I say that so that we can get the chronology right.
Right.
There's no coalition. There's no Herdmanston Accord. Or there's no no Valentine's Day Accord right now between the.
If there were to be one.
All right. Okay. Let's go step by step, baby
It,
steps. So obviously, a decision has to be taken
right.
about whether there will be a coalition. Now, for me, there are many things that precede that. One is
Well, you're going to step ahead of me. I want to, just to get those questions answered. Let me ask this. Let me ask a separate question.
Mhm.
Why did the AFC thought it would be judicious, prudent to compete alone? And what were the lessons learned when it realized it did not perform well? And then we'll come to the coalition question.
Okay. So I'm happy you raised that local government question, because I was one of the people in the AFC, perhaps the lone voice, that said that local government elections should not have national parties competing. And I actually went against my executive and went to places like Bartica and spoke in favor of local parties. Bartica, I think I can't remember the name of the party. There was a party from Bartica that consisted of local persons putting themselves up. And my position was driven by this. You may live in a neighborhood in which there are not too many social tensions other than when you get close to election. And you have a good doctor and you got a good engineer and a good lawyer, different ethnicities, who want to be able to defend and who want to be able to develop that area in which they live in that NDC. If you say that these two big parties, with all the implications of ethnicity, etc., decide to descend into the local government elections, if that doctor that wants to run is Indian, he will automatically be perceived in a particular way. If the lawyer who wants to run is African, he'll be perceived in a way. And what both of those people will do, because they have professional careers, is decide they're not participating because they do not want to expose themselves to the level of vile political bilge that comes at them if they try to compete. So if Dr. Singh decides he's backing the AFC, somebody's going to say you're breaking ranks. If Dr. Fraser decides he's backing the AFC, somebody is going to say to him, you're breaking ranks because you're going against the traditional parties. And what that does in the long run is it drives away our better equipped citizens who want to participate and contribute at a local government level. They don't want to get into national politics, but they want to make the area better. They want to make their society better. And my position back in, I think that was 2015, 2016, was that the big parties shouldn't get involved in local politics because you don't get the best out of the system. What you get is the same competition and all the byproducts, the bad byproducts from the national level coming into the small level. So we had internal difficulties because I was chairman of the party at the time, and I took a contrary view because there were several persons then who wanted to say we should compete within the coalition. Two, the difficulty the Alliance for Change suffered was that there was a lot of resistance both internally and externally amongst Alliance for Change supporters who were uncomfortable with the coalition. That's just a fact. There's no point hiding it. People were uncomfortable. So when they shortly after the national elections and they got to the local government elections, you do remember that within a year of the coalition getting into office, they had squandered a lot of the goodwill they had going into office. That we can go back and look at it, but within a year,
I agree with that
that's a
assessment.
fact.
I agree with that.
So by the time the local government elections came around, a lot of that goodwill had evaporated, and people were traditional AFC supporters were a little suspicious about what was going on. Now, at the local government level, and particularly in the case of the Alliance for Change, it didn't have the party apparatus that the big parties have. And that is to be able to compete in 10 regions. You have to have scrutineers in 10 regions. You got to have party activists in 10 regions. You have to have the finances to be able to operate in 10 regions. And that is not an easy task. And we didn't have the sort of base the PPP had or the PNC. So to be able to effectively compete at local government, we would have to have those things. And my position at the time was we should not have participated, both on the principled position that national political parties shouldn't participate in these local governments, and two, we just didn't have the capacity. So I think it was a foregone conclusion long before our voters stepped into the poll that we were not going to do particularly well at local government elections.
Because of that, there was a perception, because of its poor performance, it was perception that the AFC had lost significant support.
Mm-hmm.
Some people ascribed it to because it competed on its own and not within the coalition. That may or may not be true. Moving forward, is the AFC still committed to being in an opposition alliance or so-called coalition for the next election? And if they're in that coalition, during the period of the coalition, and let's say there's a coalition agreement, are they committed to sticking within that coalition and participating in any election, competing in any election together rather than separate?
It's way too early to try to read those tea leaves. What I would say is there is no commitment at this point to anything, because the AFC has a lot of work to do rebuilding its brand and persuading not only its previous supporters, but growing its support base. So that's our primary focus if I'm privileged enough to be elected.
Would you, as a leader, if elected, be open to a coalition?
I am open, well, not me. The party is open to whatever is in the best interest of Guyana. And this far out, until we know what the election date is, I cannot say to you that we would be going that way, or equally we will not be going that way. Our focus is that we have lost a lot of our support. We have a lot of work to do, and we want to be as credible as either of the other two parties as a party capable of running the country. But we certainly don't intend to run it alone, because we believe everybody should be sitting down. We need a government of national unity.
Right. And so you're committed to shared governance.
I'm committed to a government of national unity for a specific period that will allow us to change our constitution, that will give us the protections that we need, that we will elect a president that has a 60% plus support, that coalitions are possible both before and after the election. We are committed to many things, or I am committed to many things that I hope to persuade the party to do. But it is way too early. And the other thing about coalitions, Rickford, you will know, it takes two to tango. If the other party says, yeah, we're coming into a coalition and we demand that we have X, Y, and Z, and the X, the Y, and the Z that they demand as part of a coalition is not acceptable to us, then clearly you don't have a consensus. You don't end up.
Well, a coalition would require an agreement, and to get an agreement, you have to have negotiations and a consensus. So yes, we understand that.
But again, it will be driven on our part, provided the party is persuaded by me.
By national interest.
National interest first, and then polls. We got to be scientific. It can't be, Nigel, wake up and think he wants to have a coalition because it looks as if it's going to work. No, it's got to be driven by what the populace is saying to us. And we have work to do. We have to go out and we have to meet people. We have to meet the business community. We have to meet the labor community. We have to meet the employed. We have to meet the unemployed. We have to meet the criminal element, because we have to get a true sense of where the country is. Not what we sit down or any party sits down and gets only from their supporters. We have real work to do.
Several persons, when they saw that you were coming on the show tonight, messaged me with questions pertaining to how solid is your commitment to the political process and to be a party leader. And they cite previous experiences where you're party leader or party chairman and you quit. And they feel that they might throw their support behind you. And when the goings get tough and the attacks come and the political mudslinging come, you will bow out of the arena. How solid is your commitment
No,
to
I,
be
I,
leader
I
of the AFC?
let me address that specifically, and I thank you for that question. There were two occasions when I resigned, and I'll
Right.
address both of them. The first occasion is when the Amalia Falls. My firm was were the lawyers for the overseas company Site Global. This was involved in the Amalia Falls, and I think I was the company secretary. I had declared to my party before that became a public issue that by virtue of my office and the work I do, I was the company secretary. I declared that. When it became public, I can't remember, either the leader or the chairman of the party said, I'm not aware of this. And I asked them to go back to the minutes to check specifically when I made the declaration. They didn't. And the only option for me, Nigel Hughes, is where you challenge and say that I either must be lying or you say that I am being less than honest about a matter, is to resign. I'm sorry, that's where I come from.
Right.
On the second occasion, it was in March, the year after we got elected. The People's National Congress representatives were, contrary to the agreement, taking over all the major positions. They control the cabinet secretary, the role of the prime minister in the cabinet. A series of actions were taken by our coalition partner that we believed were contrary to the spirit of the accord and the actual accord. The Alliance for Change executive at its highest decision-making level met at the Arthur Chung Convention Center. We took a specific decision, we passed a resolution, and we issued a press release. The Prime Minister was at that meeting and most of the executives of the Alliance for Change. We passed it. We said for this coalition to work, it cannot continue that way. That press release was issued, and there's certain people in the leadership of the party who were not at that meeting, I think they were out of the country, came the next day, and when they were asked by the press, what do they have to say about that? They said that they were unaware of it, and they found it curious and didn't support it. The following day, there was a protest in front of the Kaichur News saying that I was trying to break up the coalition and I could not be trusted. I was the chairman of the party. And again, Mr. Burke, if you say to me where the highest decision-making body in the party made a particular decision, we all signed off. It wasn't a Nigel Hughes decision. The prime minister was there. It's dealt with a specific issue of how the coalition, how the Alliance for Change was being sidelined and marginalized and what should be done to go forward. So this was not a criticism. It actually identified the way forward. And after they passed that resolution, we released the press statement. If those that were vested with the official leadership powers in the party sought to distance themselves by it, and then there was a protest by our coalition partner against me, I am sorry, again, on principle, I had no choice. I resigned. Allow me, I resigned because we took a decision to protect the Alliance for Change, and there were persons who were
From
not
governance
interested.
of the major partner.
Right. So before I continue to pretend to be chairman of a party, I left. And I believe in my personal position that for me, principle is you have to take a principle position.
No, I understand and accept the principle. Let me ask you this. Why, two questions. Why not stay as a political leader and work out that difference? Because there's obviously misinformation, misperception there. Why not work out? Why quit? And if while you're chairman, the same thing happened and you're accused similarly, while if you're elected leader, if the same thing happened now, would you quit again based on your principles, or would you stay and work it out and lead the party, and so that we can clear up all those differences?
Well, as leader, your responsibilities are a lot more onerous. Um, I am keenly aware that a lot more people I have responsibilities to. I was merely the chairman of the party at the time. And what you're asking me is whether a similar situation arises. A similar situation can't arise because I would be the leader of the party. And therefore, I believe that the principles that I would bring to bear to how we operate would be different. I'm
But
not
some people will agree
criticizing it.
with you. Some people will disagree with you. So that's
No,
there's a
disagreement is not a
situation
problem.
where half the party. I guess what I'm trying to get you to do.
Rickford,
Go ahead.
every single day,
Mhm.
my profession takes me into court.
Right.
Somebody has to win, somebody has to lose. I don't win all the time, and I certainly don't lose all the time.
Right.
So my business is accepting results. That is not an issue. And I'm sorry. If I am responsible for leading a political party, that the buck stops with me. I am not going to quit and run simply because they're members of the executive that hold a different view. The party has rules and procedures for how it proceeds. And if the party has taken a decision that I don't agree with, I still have to carry it out. That's what I've signed up for.
Right.
That's what I signed up for as leader.
Even if they pick it against you, you will not quit.
No, if they pick it against me, of course not. Of course.
How about if the PPP starts to attack you and all the nasty? People want to hear that. People want to hear.
PPP will attack me.
Right.
Not because I'm Nigel Hughes, but that's their modus operandi. The
Right.
PPP don't have a philosophy that believes that everybody can contribute to the development of this country, irrespective of where they stand on the political scale. So whether it's Nigel Hughes, Raphael Trotman, Sherrod Duncan, they are going to attack whoever it is. That's given. That there's nothing special about that. It's unfortunate, but there's nothing special about it. So that I signed up for that. I know that.
So last question on this topic. So if you're elected leader of the Alliance for Change, whether the Alliance for Change is in a partnership or standalone party, and you're the candidate as the leader, under no circumstances will you quit. You're in it for the long haul. You're in it to win.
Ask me an absolute question. You're going to be alive tomorrow morning? You hope so.
I would pray
Right?
God that I would be.
Absolutely. So there's never an absolute position. One can never say under no circumstances at all. Absolutely not. I mean, if I think it would be I want to be kind here. I don't believe that anybody who has the serious responsibility of leading a political leadership, leading a political party, will say that give you an absolute answer. George Bush Sr., what did he say? Read my
Well,
lips, know
the
your
intent.
taxes.
I guess what people are looking for, people want to support you, but they don't want they want to be sure that there's no ambivalence and that you are in it. They support you. You're in it to win it, and they will be with you, and you all would fight this thing together, struggle and win. That's what I guess.
Yeah, I'm committed, and it's difficult to self-promote, and I have to tell you, I don't know how to self-promote. But I believe
in politics and when you're going for leadership, you have to self-promote because that's what gives people confidence.
Well, I think maybe I don't quite fit that mold. But I would only invite you to look at my dedication to issues when I was not in politics. My dedication in the Henry Boys, that had nothing to do with political support. Excuse me. You pick it, my dedication to the indigenous land rights, just look at it. I mean, it's uncomfortable for me to say, look at these things, but in those areas, I have persisted to the end, good or bad, to bring a result that I believe is just and fair.
Good. So that's question. Let's say the Alliance for Change, let's say you're elected, you have the confidence of the majority of the members, and you're elected. What are some of the first steps you will take to promote the Alliance for Change and to do the things you say are required to gain back the membership and the support of many people in the nation, and even to increase the level of support you had previously? What are the first set of things you'll do?
Well, one of the first things we have to do as a party internally very quickly is to look at where we lost our support, why we lost that support, and what it is that led to us losing that support. So we have, from the postmortem, some sense of what went wrong. Two, we have to devise as a matter of great urgency, and we hope to engage people in and out of Guyana, professors, academics, people who are skilled, an economic plan that is going to deliver the equitable and fair redistribution of the wealth of this country in a sustainable manner. So we're not just going to say, oh, we're going to build roads, we're going to put a couple $1 billion into schooling without dealing with the fundamentals. Fundamental to the future of this country's education. Absolutely. And therefore, we have to revamp the education system so that those people who enter school from kindergarten, and we guarantee them until they're 12, the best education system. It means we have to retrain our teachers, and in some cases have an entirely new system for training teachers. This process, if I may say, where extra lessons seems to be an integral part of our system, comes out to the fact that our teachers are not economically secure. So why are they not secure? Because they have to go do all these things to try and at least live at a half decent level. What are their principal concerns? They got to have a house, they have a mortgage to carry, they need transportation. I would like to propose, subject to its economic feasibility, that we establish a system that gives teachers 30-year mortgages at below market rates. We develop special housing areas of the highest quality, but at the same time, their performance is tied to minimum criteria. You have to deliver 90% of your cohort at a particular level of education. So we remove from them the burden of having to hustle. They get duty-free cars. And so their sole responsibility would be to produce the highest quality students in this country, all the way through to tertiary. Coupled with that would be serious funding for research purposes at the university in the areas that are relevant to Guyana's development. So we're not going to fund research into space aeronautics or satellite launching. No, because it's not relevant. We have to identify what are the critical areas that this country will require skills in for the next 10 to 15 years, fund the research so that we get out of those areas the best results that will allow us to become even more competitive.
We believe in free education from nursery to university?
Yeah, we have to have free education. Well, let me say, we have to provide the opportunity for free education for nursery to university. But where you get a gift and you feel it's an entitlement and you don't have to perform, we tend to suddenly develop attitudes of entitlement. That education that you get, because we have to lift the human development levels in the country, is tied to performance. Has to be tied to performance. You can't expect that the state will give you that commitment. Coupled with that, we need a program that is going to train our young people who have fallen off the map, who don't finish secondary school. It's going to be a voluntary program, but we have to have a program where they can go into this program. They will get trained in specific areas, vocational, that will have a very heavy disciplinary component. But at the end of that, you will be specifically trained for areas of growth in the economy so that you will be able to provide for yourself, whether it's your own business or whether you go into some form of education, some sort of form of employment. That is a must.
Right. The University of Guyana suffered for lack of resources And we see the government now shifting to this gold university, which I call nonsense, where people who don't even speak English are lecturing to persons for tertiary education. And people are asking, why not pour that money into the ministry, the University of Guyana, expand the curriculum, make it more relevant to today, the programs more relevant to today's economy, introduce PhD programs, collaborate with universities all around the world to have masters, PhDs, whatever, rather than pour this money into gold. Maybe somebody is from the government is benefiting from running that program or whatever it is. So would you, if you were to be a part of a government that's elected, would you continue that gold program, or would you put the money into the University of Guyana, make it bigger, grander, so that it could be recognized all around the world and have collaborative academic programs with Harvard and UCLA and all of these schools to make the university greater and more recognized and accomplished?
You've just limited my responses to two, but I want to say this. Way back in the day, when I went to university in the UK, both the Singapore government and the Malaysian government had taken the decision that they would take their best and brightest and send them to the best foreign education institutions worldwide, because they knew they had to build a world-class country, whether it was in private or public sector. Guyana, for it to develop, needs skills in specific areas. So if you, Rickford Burke, or your child, if you want to become a space scientist, no problem. You're not doing it on the government's dime. You can go become a space scientist if you win an exceptional scholarship. What we need to do is several things. One, we need to identify some of our students who are exceptional and send them to the best institutions that we can find globally, knowing that they're going to come back after 3-4 years, whether they stay on for a master's. Two, our own premier educational institution, University of Guyana, has to have that funding, particularly in research, in all its departments, so that it now becomes a world-class educational institution. So all students who go to the University of Guyana will benefit from the best that we can do. Now, this is not going to happen overnight, but it has to get funded. And therefore, we have to put that money into the education facilities that we have. We will probably have more than one university. Then thirdly, we have to, on the vocational front, make sure that the institutions like the Technical Institute and the other institutions that are dedicated to passing on technical skills, again, have the best equipment, have the best research facilities there, and the best training facilities. We must ensure that as a country, once we have the resources, that there is a certification process, so that when our students pass through these education institutions that are in Guyana, they get certification that is acceptable globally, so that even if they're not here, the difficulty with gold is it is not focused on Guyana's development. It's just focused in saying, oh, look, if you want to go do a degree, whether it's online or elsewhere, you can do it. No, the country has certain specific needs to develop, and these are the areas that we are going to promote. And that is how I would certainly advocate we address the educational challenges. The last area is information technology. There is no way any country is going to survive in the next 15 to 20 years if it does not have a strong component of information technology training. And we have to use that to our absolute advantage, and we have to make sure that we create the environment both for the training of our people in that area and also for the investment of international business in information technology here in Guyana.
Moving along the same plane of human development, some people feel, including myself, that we have not done well in terms of advancing the development of women and youth in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we need more laws. We have laws that talk about, percentage of women in certain.
We don't need more laws, Brickford. What we
We have
need
the laws. Okay.
We
Well, you
need,
have them in parliament.
no,
But
no,
how do we empower women and youth? What would be your
we need to,
if you were to lead the AFC and a government participating in a coalition government or by itself, how would you promote empowerment of youth and women?
okay, youth and women, and I'm going to start with business, need to be able to develop their businesses. Do we have the appropriate financial instruments that allow women in business? And we have a lot of women in business, whether they're running consultancies, whatever they're running, whether they're running their own companies, that allows them quick, rapid, easy access to competitive interest rate loans without having to go through this long trauma of a mortgage. So whether they want to say the cash flow of the business will become the security for the mortgage, or not for the mortgage, sorry, for the loan that they're looking for, we have to make it easier for women in business to operate and become successful. I believe the data, and I haven't seen it, I believe the data is that women are better persons at business than men. They're more responsible generally. And therefore, we need to be able to create the environment in which women can grow their businesses and excel. The same applies for youth. I, again, subject to what the figures say, believe that from the time you leave school, you're entitled to a piece of Guyana. You shouldn't have to go through hoops to get it. You are entitled to a piece of Guyana. And one of the things that is happening right now in Guyana is that the real estate prices in Georgetown are so high that even Guyanese businesses at some time will not be able to afford real estate in Guyana. So we have to devise a method by which once you finish school, you own a piece of Guyana. And you could do what you want with it. If you're silly enough to sell it, that's fine. But you get that, and you get that opportunity to move forward. And if we have a sophisticated business environment which allows people to get access to credit at competitive rates that allows them to run their businesses, and we have to also, in some areas, protect some businesses so they grow and they become stronger. And then at that stage, we remove the protections and allow them to compete globally. Trinidad did that for a long time. That's how you've got successful companies like SM Jamil. You've got the Masses and the other companies, because there has to be an incubatory period in which you allow these businesses to grow. You can't subsidize them, but they've got to become competitive, and then you allow them to compete globally, because we have to
Um,
build a world-class country.
in terms of youth, some people are advocating for to change regulation in Ghana to allow young people from 18 to acquire loans, mortgages, buy house lots. Do you support that?
Absolutely, that's almost a no-brainer, Rickford. That's a no-brainer. What we have to do is make it easier that the people who don't have rich parents can go to the market. You can have a junior stock market where they can go to the market with the power of an idea and the power of their financial forecasts, raise money, and run their business. There are a lot of people now that can't do that. There's no junior stock exchange. And unless you have, when you go to the bank, the amount of hoops you have to jump through to actually get a loan. And they have to be areas which we want to encourage development in Guyana. So if it's the creative arts, we're going to monetize and support the development of the creative arts. So we develop uh, income generation. We have to be able to fund those areas. So they're going to be special areas that we target. Agriculture, of course, is a no-brainer. That's an obvious one. And we have to find, we talk about the bread baskets of the Caribbean. I don't know, I think it's some ridiculous number, $35 billion worth of food imported into the Caribbean. We have to be able not just to say to the farmers, grow this crop. We have to help them make sure that that crop is standardized and gets to market in the Caribbean. And we have to be reliable. That is where we've consistently failed. We are excellent at producing great samples. But the second we get an order, and this is historic in Ghana, you show the people Wallaba doors or Womara doors or whatever, and they love the product, and then they say, well, can you give me 20 containers a month? No, we can't. So there is a problem in our production line in Guyana, and we have to solve it. We have to find real ways of solving our ability to become dependable and reliable in the business of commerce.
Recently, the African American governor, young African American governor of Maryland, pardoned over 100,000 offenders who were convicted of marijuana offenses. In Guyana, mostly Afro-Guyanese youth, but youth across the country, all ethnicities and social strata suffer from a lack of opportunities, in particular in Afro-Guyanese communities, and conviction of small drug offenses. Do you support, one, decriminalizing marijuana, two, expunging those records, and
Rickford,
creating more opportunities for young people?
Rickford, you're asking the wrong person. You remember that myself and Mark Waldron drafted a bill and had Michael Carrington present it to Parliament as an opposition MP to decriminalize and certainly remove imprisonment of people convicted of small quantities of marijuana. When we campaigned before getting into office, I advanced specifically that should be one of our key areas of legislative reform. The coalition got into office, it didn't do anything about it. And it was the present PPP government that actually passed the legislation, that it didn't decriminalize it, but it certainly increased the levels of possession of marijuana before people are imprisoned. So you're speaking to the converted here. I absolutely do not believe that we should be incarcerating people for marijuana use under no, and it may not be popular, but I don't believe. And here's the, even if you have a difference of opinion with me with that, here's the carnage that happens. You get arrested. A lot of teenagers experiment, they try weed, they hear about it. You get arrested, you go to the police station, you end up in court, you get remanded in custody. The prison is a university. It creates higher level criminals by the time they get out, because you are in a concentrated area of people who have very special skills in criminal activity. Where you are remanded, where you are not yet found guilty, you put that person into that environment, they have to live, not just through the first night, they have to live until they get acquitted or put in bail. They are, for the 24 hours that they are in that institution, they are exposed to people who are highly skilled in a lot of criminal activity. They are going to gather that skill. They're going to learn it. And then when they come out, they're stigmatized because they went to jail. Most of these people are the children of poor people. Poor people's children get locked up for narcotics. Rich people's children solve that problem before the police get that to court. So we are condemning poor people's children to a life in which they're not only exposed to criminal activity, they come out and they're rejected, they're ostracized. And what are their options? And I want to clarify, perhaps because in the urban areas, African children are more likely to be arrested for marijuana. What is happening equally in the rural areas, off the main streets, in the Indian areas,
Other
there are a
ethnicities.
lot of youth who are on the same narcotics that are equally subject to the same level of incarceration. It's not as visible because it's rural, but we have a real problem with it. And for me, nationally, we have to address that problem across the board.
Concomitant to the decriminalization of marijuana, if you're going to decriminalize it, it therefore means that there will be an injustice
You-
because persons prior would be convicted. Do you agree that, or would you support expunging those records
Yeah,
for
I mean,
persons who were convicted?
I don't think a business, unfortunately, I'm not going to, well, I have to. You can't be in the business of incarcerating your citizens at percentages like 10%, as you have in the United States of the African population in prison. That can't be the business of the state. The business of the state must be to take as many measures as it can to avoid people actually ending up in being incarcerated. Of course, violent crimes, offensive crimes, people who troubling children, sexual offenses. Yes, a lot of those people you don't want on the street. But we have to make sure that whatever we need to do as a society to avoid people getting incarcerated, that we do the best we can to avoid that.
There's a big issue with African Guyanese, in the African Guyanese community or population in Guyana with equality. There's no question that this government discriminates against African Guyanese. You did a study with regard to how government contracts are distributed. Um, House lots, contracts, arrests. Throughout the society, there's discrimination. How would you address the issue of land distribution? We obviously there's we need a policy that promotes equity, but guys, 63,000 square miles. Only about 18 to 20% is occupied. Yet this government is taking away lands from people like the people at Moko and West Coast Balis and so on. How would the AFC correct this wrong? And do you see a need for us to, in an unprecedented way, opening up lands in the country, all over the country, build new communities, build new roads, so that we can have real development, build industries, etc.?
Okay. You know, and I think on several of your programs before, I have spoken about the need, the absolute need for disaggregated data. Because the only way you can begin to address a problem is if you have the disaggregated data. I will use a non controversial example. If there are 10 regions, and in those 10 regions, you're doing a study on diabetes, and you say, well, okay, in the allocation of resources of diabetic drugs, I'm going to give the same resources per capita to each region. If you do that, you miss the most fundamental aspect of that, which is if you disaggregate the data, you may discover that the African people suffer more from diabetes than any other ethnicity. And therefore, you need to concentrate more of the diabetic cures and drugs to the regions in which there's a concentration of African persons. That's not a racist position. That is just using data to be able to solve a problem. And we have to get to the stage in Guyana where every person has a right to information and disaggregated data. It must be made public so that the public understands that when you look at house lot distribution, what does the disaggregated data say? And if the disaggregated data says that they are underserved people or people who are not being served at all relative to other people, then we have to rectify that by allocating the resources to the people who were underserved or not served at all. For example, the Ministry of Education 2 years ago or last year published that no person living in a riverine or hinterland area in Guyana got an A. Translated, no indigenous person in Guyana got an A at CXC when Guyana topped the Caribbean with people from the coast getting 24 A's. That clearly means that the quality of education that is being delivered to the riverine and hinterland areas has a problem, and therefore we have to concentrate our resources on making sure those students get the quality of training that will allow them to come up to the national average, which, by the way, is low, but we need to raise the national average. So that's how you treat with it. You don't treat with it, well, I'm only going to put schools in the areas where the people vote for me, or I hope to be able to get them to vote for me. That is an absolutely crazy approach to education. So my position on that is that we know that there's discrimination, but we need to approach it scientifically, present the data to the country. This is what it is, and this is what is my plan. You just referred to a study I had done. You know, since that study was done, the government has not implemented a single policy to rectify all
Because they
those.
don't believe in equality.
All I'm saying is, since it was done,
Right.
they have done nothing to rectify it, and nobody from the government challenged the authenticity of the figures.
Right.
Not a single person. So we haven't seen, for example, in quarry licenses that it is now equitable. We haven't seen for the contracts in the health industry that it's more equitable. We see up to today in the newspaper that a contract was given to a company for $1.2 billion to build a wharf for the Guyana Defense Force, which company did not meet the financial requirements, and it went through NPTAP. So clearly the system is not working.
Right. Let's talk a little bit of the. I have four rapid questions before we close. The judiciary. The U.S. Human Rights Report pointed to what they say is corruption in the judiciary without emphasizing on what this corruption is. We
The
know that.
US, you saying the Human Rights Report said that?
Yeah. Yes.
This
The
year?
report
A
for
contemporary.
2023. Yes. They pointed to corruption in the judiciary and the Guyana Police Force. And we're going to come to Guyana Police Force. But do you think that under consideration of constitutional reform, that or during the consultation for constitutional reform, we should consider some sort of proviso in the Constitution where it says if a person is acting as Chancellor and Chief Justice for X period of time and not conform, or the President is not fulfilling his responsibility to consult with the opposition leader and seek his consent for confirmation for those two positions, so as to give the judiciary some stability and independence. Would you consider putting a provision in there saying if the person is acting for X period of time and not confirmed through the process outlined, then they shall be deemed constitutionally confirmed after a certain period?
Absolutely, I think that's an excellent suggestion. But what I want to say, nationally, we should be embarrassed that it's 25 years we've never confirmed a chancellor and a chief justice, and certainly it is uncomfortable to put judges in the position where you have politicians arguing over. I like that. Yeah, I like the judge, and the other person says, no, I don't like this judge. I want somebody else. That is an unfair position to put judges in, because it's almost as if you're saying that the politicians know, I have my judge who I want, and you have your judge, and we can't agree on the same judge. That's a difficult position to put any judicial officer in. I think it's unfair, it's offensive, because their work is to dispense justice. And what happens is if they then give a decision that might be consistent with the government or the opposition, they're always going to be under a cloud of suspicion. You can't ask our best and brightest people who become judges to live in that environment. It's completely unacceptable. We have the Attorney General attacking judges. What are we doing here? We can't be serious. So yes, I think you may want to put a default provision in. I mean, we have to understand why we ended up in the position where we required consensus. That's because of the deep level of distrust between the political entities. But we should put a default position in that says after specified length of time of disagreement or inability to arrive at a conclusion, that the office holders who sit there can be confirmed.
Similarly, in terms of the appointment or the nomination of the persons to even act, appointed or even act, because I think the doctrine requires consultation. So I think even putting somebody to act without consultation is unconstitutional. But should we move now to a point where the Parliament, by a higher threshold than majority, appoints the Chief Justice and the Chancellor rather than the President? Because if you look at the process, throughout the process, the President is controlling the appointment of the Chief Justice and Chancellor, because he appoints the Commission, Judicial Service Commission, makes a recommendation to him, then he appoints. So the President controls the appointment in the Judiciary. To move away from that, shouldn't we go to Parliament and require the Parliament to vote at a higher threshold than just a majority, to make sure that there's a participation in the decision to appoint these key members of the judiciary by all at least the major representatives in parliament?
My solution to that would start with, if the president has to get 60% support to become president, and coalition governments are possible after the election, you will have a completely different type of president, because you're not going to have a president who appears to, where you ought not to have a president, I should say, who appears to be pandering to partisan political interests. If you need 60% of the National Assembly or 60% of the vote to become president, if you are heading a coalition of sorts, you will not behave in a manner that is contrary to your political best interests, in which case you are not going to be, you will not attempt to tinker with the process. And your role, limited to identification of both the Chancellor and the Chief Justice, will perforce have to be based on, hopefully, the qualification. Now, to send it to Parliament, to a certain extent, I am weary about that, because you're sending the appointment of your judicial officers to a political process, and political processes are a special category, especially in Guyana.
Well, with the same proviso, that if the parliament doesn't vote within a certain period of time, then the persons acting in those positions, or most senior person in the judiciary, shall occupy those positions by default.
Maybe we should look at how we structure the Judicial Service Commission. It may well be that the present structure of the Judicial Service Commission is inadequate. We don't necessarily need the head of the Public Service Commission to sit in the Judicial Service Commission.
Who's appointed by the president?
Yeah, well, yeah, officially, yes, who is appointed by the president, but we need to perhaps look at how we strengthen the membership of and the structure of the Judicial Service Commission, so that it is dedicated to its specific task and insulated. So in the Caribbean, for example, the appointment of the process for the CCJ can be mirrored for judges in Guyana, so that you insulate it. What we want is, we need to insulate people so they can do their professional jobs. But we end up with GCOM, where we say half the commission must be government and half must be opposition. That is a political organization, however you define it. We need to get to the stage where we get the best structure for the Judicial Service Commission, and we have that of the Caribbean, of the CCJ.
The police. Do you believe the police force should be disbanded and reconstituted, maybe with outside help? The police force now has completely lost its integrity and credibility. You've seen how many false statements they put out. You've seen the whole management structure breakdown.
When you disbanded, what you're doing? The period between disbanding and putting up a new one.
Well, the leadership, at least the leadership structure.
Well, that's a
and
different
how
thing.
they're appointed.
Disbanding the police force and addressing the leadership issues.
Correction, not the force, but the leadership structure and how they're appointed. Let's take out disbanded and put reform. Let's use reform.
Well, I think it's evident that the Guyana police force needs reform, without a doubt. Absolutely. I mean, they continue to be embarrassed every day by people getting arrested in the United States for things that are occurring in Guyana. So I don't think it's any secret that the Guyana police force is not performing optimally. Absolutely.
And it's become totally politicized.
I think it is. You want to say politicized? I'm just saying it's not functioning. We should have an inquiry into what are the several areas, including politics, why it is not functioning. But I certainly don't think it's political intervention alone that is causing it to be dysfunctional. There are several things, and if we're serious about it, we need to have a comprehensive, independent review of the Guyana police force and its operations. I think that review will show many things, political intervention, but it may also show many other issues, the level of remuneration, the entrance requirements, various other issues that I think need also to be conducted. So I wouldn't want to just remove the political element. I would like to have a Guyana police force that has higher entrance requirement, definitely higher levels of salary, higher levels of scrutiny, and whatever the requirements are for a modern functioning law enforcement agency. So I accept that the Guyana police force heavily influenced by apparently political decisions, but that is not the only reason why it is not functioning.
Is there a need for an oversight board between above that's independent of the minister or
Everybody,
the cabinet?
every single arm of the government needs an oversight board. And I dare say in the private sector, you need an oversight. You can't run a country if you don't have oversight boards. Yeah, I mean, it's not if you don't have the power to review potential abuses by people, you're not serious. So it's not just the police force. I think all of us need oversight boards for sure.
We just saw the United States government sanctioning a government official and two business persons in Guyana in order to give back confidence to the people that the government is not completely corrupt, because the report says that government officials were bribed. It said that 10 times, even in the police force, for gun license and so on. Do you think there should be a complete investigation, commission of inquiry to determine the extent to which this government has been compromised by this operation, this bribery and corruption operation?
Okay. Two things. I believe that if you're going to accuse somebody, give them the details, charge them, and let them defend themselves. And if they can't do that, deal with it. I am wary about the allegations being made. And then, of course, the U.S. is not going to make that allegation unless it has solid evidence. But I think certainly from Guyana's perspective, we need to be able to go ahead and prosecute that. We need to do that. And if there is such an awful indictment that says our people have been involved, our law enforcement people charged with upholding the laws have been involved in compromising the integrity of our legal system, then provide them with sufficient limited information that does not compromise your
But who are you going to
American
give that
interests.
information to?
Well, you see, you're operating on the basis, and you're correct, that we are not a normal country. Absolutely, we're not a normal country. If we had a normal country,
Right.
then it wouldn't be a difficulty doing that. And so what we should be hammering the government on is that our law enforcement agencies do not enjoy the trust of what our principal business partner. So we need to rectify that immediately, which is your point you're making, Justin, for. We need to
Right.
revamp the Guyana police force.
But it's not only the Guyana police force. The government, it's a government officials, police officials. So the entire government is corrupt. So that's why the United States, because the United States is going to compromise sources and methods if they give, and people might get killed if they give this kind of information to the PPP government.
So how do we do this responsibly? Because unless you're talking about a regime change otherwise than by means of an election, there's going to be chaos if you suddenly, at a mass sweep, deal with moving the whole government and all the corrupt officials. You've got to identify how you're going to address this. Where's the principal area? Well, first of all, what is evident is that none of our law enforcement agencies enjoys the confidence of the United States, who is our major trading partner, number one trading partner. That's a problem. So we need to address that. And that requires an overhaul, clearly a complete overhaul of the Guyana Police Force. It is evident that there are areas of government which have been clearly implicated by our major trading partner and trusted friend in corrupt practices. Those areas need overhauling. But what normally happens in other societies is that sort of report triggers a lack of confidence in the government and an election. If you recall, what Barrett Jack Dio, when he moved the motion of no confidence in the government in 2018, what he was alleging is 1% of what the US government has just said is happening in Guyana's government. And if we were a normal country, this would trigger immediately a vote in the House based on the contents of what a major trading partner that has no vested interest has said about our institutions. But we don't live like that. We're not normal.
Two last questions. There's outcry about the Exxon contract. How would you address that? Should it be laid in Parliament and have a
No.
debate?
Let me deal with Exxon. because I know where this question is coming from. One of my people who is competing against me. My company works for Exxon, so professionally I can't comment on what they do.
Okay.
That's a fact. And I'm happy that you've given me an opportunity to put that out there so that people know. And they don't say like they did before that I did not release that information.
Okay.
I'm
So
not
you
the
can't comment on the
no,
contract either.
no, I'm not the partner that manages that client,
Okay.
but my firm does. And therefore I will not comment on anything to do with them.
Okay. If you are elected leader of the AFC, and let's assume, and I know this is all assumptions, and let's assume you enter coalition or in some form or the other, either together or alone, you enter into government, and there's
Can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
Why do you assume that we cannot also aspire to a government of national unity?
Well, even if it's I said any form. I said any form.
No.
If we had a government of unity, if we have a coalition, if we have standalone AFC government, and they're asked to address this question, what would be your advice?
Which question you're asking me? Sorry,
About contract, not their conduct of their business or how they operate as a business.
No,
the contract.
Clearly, anything to do with any client of mine, not just Exxon, any client of my firm, I should say, I cannot touch it. I cannot advise. I cannot recommend. I wouldn't pretend to recommend. I wouldn't pretend to advise. I will establish as best I can an institution and a body that hires the best legal professional advice internationally, not in Guyana, because we don't have the capacity to provide advice to that body, and that body can go forward. But there is nowhere I would touch it with a 10-foot pole, because it won't be appropriate, it won't be proper, and I will not touch it. I will.
How do you address the criticism from the PPP? I noticed Priya Manichan criticizing you, saying that you opened an office in Houston as if Afro-Guyanese political leaders are not entitled to expand their business abroad.
You know, again, it's such a distorted reality in Guyana. I opened an office in Texas because, as a private law firm, we realized that people are going to be coming to Guyana in the oil industry who don't know where Guyana is. In 2016, very few people in the oil industry knew where Guyana was. It's a prudent business decision that we took at that time. And somehow in Guyana, we have developed, we consider it national, we consider it natural. Oh, Mr. Singh making a lot of money. Christ, if Mr. Singh works hard, why Mr. Singh can't make a lot of money? Oh my God, Mr. Burke making a lot of money. We almost think it is a curse for people to make money. If you're doing this legitimately, what is the problem with it? So if you just think of that criticism by the minister, I opened an office in Texas. Oh, come on, seriously? I congratulate and encourage anybody across every ethnic group to grow their businesses, take it internationally. If you're selling products, SM Jamil, if you really look at the Chubby story, little Trinidadian company, global master. That is the sort of stuff we need to applaud. And I don't know why we think that because somebody has done something that promotes, that it's in their interest, promotes the business, all of a sudden, that is a basis for criticism. We have to, we really have to change our mentality. Innovative Guyanese. Sorry, go ahead.
Two questions. We have about 3 minutes left. We have two questions from the audience. I'm going to again include the audience. One, it's about your representation of Nigel Darmlan, and two, your representation of, I think, John Finance when they were seeking what people describe as ancestral lands back of BV. How do you describe your representation? How do you respond to criticism of that representation?
What is the criticism so I can be accurate in my response to you?
Well,
Tell
the criticism is that why
are you saying, oh, let me make sure that I get what you're asking. Are you saying that Nigel Hughes should not represent an Indian politician from the government party accused of sexual offense? Is that what you're asking me? Because I can respond to that.
Well, that's the question from the audience.
I'm asking you. Is that what you're saying? That if an Indian politician from the
No. The question is,
so
why did you feel the need to represent Nigel Darmlan?
It's not.
And it's more than one person asking that question. And I want you to wrap that in with the second question, with representing John Fernandez, because it's going to come up, so you might as well. Representing John Fernandez, who were seeking to acquire Black ancestral lands at the back of BV.
Okay. I provide legal services for the people who come to my law firm. We are what you call a full service law firm. So in other words, if you come to us for the most complex commercial law question, arbitration, we will provide you with the best services that we can. If you come to us accused of the most heinous crime, we will provide representation to you as best we can. We are not in the business of making moral decisions about the people that walk through our doors. We are not priests. We are lawyers that provide professional service. If the service that is required by the client or requested by the client requires us to be placed in a position of conflict, we will decline the brief. But if you're saying to me that when somebody walks through my door, I have to say, well, his political views and mine don't work. In the case of Mr. Dharamlal, he relentlessly attacked me before he came to me. He is not the first. Freddie Kissoon used to relentlessly attack me back in the days until he decided, when Mr. Jagdeo went after him, that he needed a lawyer. That's what we do. We provide legal services. And I understand where that question may be based, but that's not my call. And similarly, if you're saying to me, because John Fernandez, and it wasn't John Fernandez that retained me, but so be it. That's how the public have perceived it.
Right.
But if John Fernandez were to retain me, and it is in relation to lands that are owned historically and by persons of African descent or African people and their entitlement, that I should say to them, I can't do it. If it is presented as a contract dispute, and in the case of those ancestral lands, we should remember that it was the same Africans who got together and sold the land in the first place. And do not attempt to remove the responsibility from the people who were selling the African lands, the African people who were selling African lands, and say because the lawyer has been retained by the purchaser of those lands, somehow he had some level of responsibility to the African community to decline taking the case. When I become an activist, those are the considerations I take into account. As a lawyer, I provide those services. And the last thing I want to create for any potential client is some level of doubt that when they come to me, they may get different service, a different quality of service based on their political views. That, to me, would be an anathema to the most basic fundamental service that I provide as a lawyer.
Great. And it was, so the person asking the question, I'm glad you referred it was a contract. It's a mischaracterization. You said you represented the client in a contract dispute and not the sale of the land.
No, I didn't represent them in the sale, but let's just go to that. The African elected representatives, or some of them, of that community decided they were selling African ancestral lands, not to John Fernandez, to another company who then sold it to John Fernandez.
Got you. Thanks for clarification.
You know there's a track called Slave Catcher?
Exactly.
When they send the Africans to catch the Africans who have escaped, you want to criticize who exactly? Who?
We got a message.
Okay. Just making sure.
Thanks for coming on. I mean, we're out of time. Thanks a lot. And I know we started late, but due to the traffic congestion.
And my apologies again.
Thanks. I think people are happy. We had a good interview.
I thank you. And I thank you for your graciousness. And I thank you for affording me the opportunity.
Sure. Thanks. And I hope we can talk again.
I don't hold it against you. Have a good evening.
All right. Good night. Thanks for coming on.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Then good night. Thanks to the audience. Wow, they're still here. They didn't even move. Thank you guys for listening. We have about 16,000 people watching us. So thanks a lot for listening. Have a good night, everybody. See you on Tuesday night when I'll be talking to Sherrod Duncan, who's also contesting the leadership for the AFC. Good night, everybody.